Hello and welcome to Tech Talk Live episode 87. My name is Alfresco and today I'm joined with Peter Monks and Bindu Wevel, and we will have Gabriele Columbro joining us in just a few minutes. He's just around the corner. A couple of announcements before we dig into the cool subjects we have today is the next event is Office Hours on July 30. Richard will be interviewing the user assistant teams and talking about the docs and a lot of cool things. So be sure to join that event. That's July 30. The second announcement is we have a survey going around with the Alfresco terminology and how the language is in Alfresco and if that fits what you expect it to be. And I'll post a link in the RC channel and with the video as well to that. So be sure to fill out that form. It's just a few minutes. So should we do introductions? Bindu, let's start with you.
Sure. Hi, I'm Bindu Wevel. I'm the chief architect at Zia Consulting, and I've been somewhat involved as an external party with Alfresco, discussing release agility, developer platform, and also have been contributing to the SDK and kind of generally the developer ecosystem.
Yeah, and Peter?
Thanks, Ule. So many of you know me probably. I've been with Alfresco for a number of years, most recently working in Thomas DeMayo's product team as part of the platform product management sub-team, if you will. Gab and I being the team that handles all of the platform areas. The way that Gab and I sort of separate or split our responsibilities is by persona. So Gab has had a primary focus on developers, the developer persona, folks who are extending and customizing Alfresco in some fashion. And I've taken point on the system administrator persona. So those of you who look after production Alfresco systems, you're my primary target audience. Yeah, and certainly we can go into more detail, I guess, as the talk progresses, and welcome any questions you have.
Yeah, and I should say, as always, please put your questions on IRC, and we'll be following the discussion. The topics of today is updates from Gab and Peter. I know, Peter, you have a lot of updates on the sysadmin persona and what areas we're improving the experience from a sysadmin point of view. And I know Gab will talk a lot about how life is improving for developers with release agility and all the cool stuff that I've been working with him on for the last few months. So since Gab is a bit late, Peter, do you want to start out with your presentation?
Yeah, sure. And it's really not so much presentations, just a couple of talking points, and I hope it'll foster some conversation either on IRC, which I'm trying to monitor on my other screen, or even in the chat within Google Hangouts. So I'll try to keep an eye on both of those. And Ule and Bindu, you can keep me honest and just put your hand up or wave or jump in if there's a question. Probably the most important point that I wanted to mention is some changes in product lifecycle status. So as many of you know, in 5.0 we took a look at kind of a backlog of legacy features and products that Alfresco's developed over the years and has offered for some time. And to a large degree, we made decisions about the future of some of those features. So there is a public page on the www site. I think it's called Product Lifecycle Status. If you Google for Alfresco Product Lifecycle Status, that page should come up. That's actually kind of the canonical list of the current status of most of the features and products that Alfresco offers. It also applies or gives a visibility into the Community Edition and what's happening there. In 5.0, however, there were a number of features that we transitioned to what we call limited support. So we have a tiered support model where products are either under development, they're in full support, and Alfresco will maintain, enhance, expand, bug fix those full support features. We then have a limited support period, which is really a period in which products are being transitioned out of the product suite, and at some point will end maintenance and move to what we call knowledge-based support. And in knowledge-based support, really, this is sometimes referred to as end of life, although that term doesn't actually exist officially in Alfresco's terminology. But within those four kind of phases, from development through to KB support, there is actually a process and a series of controlled status changes that occur. So in 5.0, we did have a number of long-standing limited support items that we were able to end maintenance for. Things like the AVM, the Explorer user interface, those are probably the two big ones. There were some other features that had minimal investment or minimal adoption over the years, and so those were also moved either to limited support or indeed to KB support, depending. Two of the features that moved from full support to limited support in 5.0 were JBPM, the JBPM workflow engine, and the NFS file server protocol. So both of those things are in limited support in 5.0. Customers will still receive bug fixes, security patches, that kind of thing, but we have no intention to enhance or maintain or really continue those products over the longer term. So now that 5.next, or the next version, the version numbers I believe still a TBD, but now that the next version is getting close, it'll probably come out a little later in autumn, there's an opportunity for us to continue that process and move those products that went to limited support onward in their journey to KB support. So I did want to really highlight JBPM and NFS because these are ones that have some likelihood of affecting those of you in the implementer community. If you're using either of those things, if you're using JBPM workflows, now is the time to start moving to activity. It's been in the product for a while. It's mature, it's fully supported, it will remain fully supported, but JBPM will likely not be available to you in the next version. Same thing with NFS. The NFS protocol is something that has not had widespread adoption, and so we're looking to disable or remove that as well. I should mention, for those of you who are technically minded, this is mostly a statement about supportability. What we try to do when we move something to KB support is also make it unavailable for use, and that, in the best case, actually means removing the code, actually not having the code there at all. And for something like JBPM, that's probably what we'll do. We'll rip those jars out, basically, clean up any collateral damage as a result of removing JBPM, and then call it done. NFS is a little bit it's a little bit less clear as to whether we'll remove it or disable it. If you do happen to see some vestiges of that code around, I know some folks have pointed out the Lucene was KB supported in 5.0, but the Lucene jar is still shipped with Alfresco. That's one of those examples where we indeed did move it to KB support. It ended life in 5.0. However, we were unable to fully remove it in that release. So that does happen. We try not to make it happen. It's a little bit confusing, but just sometimes that's necessary.
So Peter, one question about that. What happens once we remove something from the product? You mentioned ripping out the jars, but what happens to the source? Do we put that on GitHub or give it to community, or is it just completely dead out there? What's the process here?
Yeah, good point, Ole. And the answer is it depends. Richard Esplin, as the community product manager, actually makes that call. And some of you may notice that at times he will sit in IRC and be asking quite specific questions around, for example, NFS or JBPM. Some of that is actually to help inform his decision about what to do. The default stance is that we open source any of our code. JBPM is obviously a third-party product, so we're not changing its availability at all. We can't. It's a Red Hat property. What we can do is consider moving the Alfresco integration code, the glue code that binds the Alfresco repository and JBPM workflow engines together, and spinning those off as an open source project. Right now, for the two that I mentioned, NFS we're looking to spin out as an open source project, so that code will be published somewhere publicly. We will be soliciting community members to step up and take a maintainer role in those projects. The JBPM code, we're not considering that at this time. There doesn't seem to be very much interest. So the short answer is it depends. We're not making these decisions in a vacuum. It's not someone just randomly stating their opinion. Richard actually does do a good job of validating these needs with the community. That's part of the reason why we like to talk to all of you through IRC and other forums, is to give you an opportunity to voice your opinion on that. And I noticed Gab joined us, so I'll try to rush through. I only had two other points. One other thing I wanted to mention, which may also affect those of you who are running Alfresco, is in the last 6 to 9 months or so, we've actually switched our, and Bindu, you may actually be quite interested in this. If you've got questions, jump in. We've switched our version. Basically, we have this sort of tug of war going on between customers who don't want us to upgrade the support for third-party components, databases, operating systems, browsers, you name it. They want us to keep the old version supported. And new customers who say, no, I want to be on the latest and greatest because that old stuff has security issues, it's old, it's nasty, my IT guys, DBAs, what have you, don't like it. So we have this tug of war going on. And in the past, we've tended more towards the conservative end of the spectrum, where we've tended not to be aggressive about upgrading the versions that we support for those third-party components, as we call them. That's changed in the last 6 to 9 months. Instead of being kind of behind, if you will, in supporting versions of third-party components, our new default stance is to be more aggressive. If something breaks, we may always revert back. There are reasons we may not go with the latest Oracle, the latest MySQL, the latest Java, you name it. But the default position is that's what we start with. I should also mention there's obviously a large window of time. We start our QA typically 2 to 3 months before a release. So we actually lock in the versions anywhere up to 6 months before a release occurs. And in that 6 months, who knows what Oracle are going to release? Who knows what Sun or IBM are going to do with WebSphere? I mean, we have to at some point draw a line in the sand, and that typically happens before. So while our default stance is now aggressive, just understand that there's this lead time where new things can happen. So that will start to roll out. It missed 5.0. 5.0 did not apply this new policy, but the next version is going to have this aggressive version currency by default stance. And then the final thing that I've been working on, this is more relevant for customers than Community Edition, but it's actually been the largest focus of my time for about 6 months, is that we are optimizing the process by which service packs and hotfixes are shipped. So we did this research round. Some of you were involved in it earlier in the year. We had about a dozen or so participants in that research. One of the things that came up quite highly on that list was it's very hard for us to consume service packs and hotfixes. Please make it easier. So that work will not. It doesn't look like at this stage it's going to make it for the next version, for that autumn release that I mentioned, but it will probably come very soon after that as a service pack itself. And in addition, we're looking to release the same thing for 5.0 and possibly 4.2 as well. As I say, not relevant for community members because community members don't get kind of service packs. They just get new builds of community. But for enterprise subscribers, that's hopefully something that will be of interest. And that was it for my talking points. I think I took up 5 more minutes than I scheduled. But any questions before we move on, or should we just jump straight into Gab and Bindu's developer?
Well, there's a slight delay between the broadcasting and the chat, but the chat is a bit quiet. But if there's any questions, I'll make sure that we circle back to it. So yeah, Gab, you joined us. Thank you for joining. Could you give a short introduction of yourself and just dive into it?
Sure. Sorry for the delay, guys. First of all, typical Italian. So I am Gabriele Columbro. Some of you might remember me from the SDK work. I now am the product manager for the platform. What regards the developer persona, that is the way that me and Peter are, dividing responsibilities on the platform side of Alfresco. So he might have already mentioned this, but sorry I was a little late, so I'm going to maybe repeat myself. He looks after more the admin persona and problems around the platform Alfresco. I take care more around, obviously, the developer persona, whether that's an internal or external developer. And the reason why I'm pointing this out, internal and external, is because it's, you'll see through my next talking points that there is a common, thread here in terms of wanting to break this separation between the external and the internal developer community. So it's been a pretty active last 6 months since I joined the role. between obviously working with the engineering teams, as well as, we hired Ole, who is really helping a lot on the developer evangelism side of the house, as well on the SDK, as well as Martin Berglund, who is my architect from the developer platform standpoint, plus a quite large team of core engineers has been dedicated to the initiative that we call release agility, as well as developer platform, more general work. So let me dive in a little bit into what the focus has been there. Specifically, I mean, release agility, as you can imagine, is a very general initiative name, and a number of different projects, if you want, or deliverables or value bundles actually fall under this general initiative name. The overarching goal of release agility is to ensure that our historically monolithic development and release process can actually be broken down in more modular and manageable parts, both from a development, testing, release standpoint. But obviously, as we embrace modularity more than we have done properly in the past, that turns into a number of enhancements that not only impact us internally from a process standpoint, but obviously have positive and beneficial impacts on the external developer platform. Things like clear interfaces and contracts and APIs between modules, a better packaging of our modules in process extension in process extensions, both on the share and Alfresco side. So these are back to the sort of initial common thread. Release agility and developer platform were originally sort of separate initiatives. We merged them into providing a much more clear developer and release experience for Alfresco. Specifically, under the umbrella of release agility, the first major step in breaking the monolith was to isolate the development and release lifecycle of share. You might have heard and saw some blog posts around shared separation. Now, share is a completely separate product developed in its own code base, as you've seen, releasable independently, and we're working on installers to allow the Alfresco platform, as we are rebranding, if you want, the repository side of the house in the new separated world, and share in an independent way. In order to achieve true independence between the release of Alfresco and the release of share, we actually introduced the concept of a shared services module, so shared services app at this point. In fact, moving forward, you can expect share releases to be composed not only of the front-end web app that you guys are used to, but also of a backing module, if you want, providing the share-specific APIs that are required. In fact, many of you will be probably familiar with the APIs that are used by Share, web scripts that live under the Slingshot URI space. As you know already, those APIs are were never meant to be public, are private APIs used only by Share and should not be leveraged by third-party developers. So in order to give true independence to the Share lifecycle, we externalized those APIs, added them in an AMP that will follow the Share release lifecycle in order to really allow Share to evolve independently, even with some additional back-end services, without having to wait for the next big release of the platform. From a shared separation, obviously, this is the main change that you can expect out there. We'll still be releasing a monolithic point-in-time, if you want, installer of the latest and greatest of the Alfresco products, but you'll also be able to cherry-pick installers and distributions, if you want, of the specific zips. Bindu.
Hey, Gab. So how are you, or two things. One is, when are we going to see this independent release? And then the second question is, what are you doing about version compatibility between share and platform?
Yep, very good point. So the first point is, to your question as to when, I don't think at this point we are going to release an independent version of share in the next sort of 2 or 3 months. We obviously have a target to release a new version of Alfresco, if you want, in the old terminology, by the Alfresco Summit. So I do think that if we're going to have independent releases, it's probably going to be after that. Other than in cloud, for example, in cloud we're obviously looking at adding share-only type of updates. I do think that, and that kind of taps into your second question, in order to be able to safe independent release, we also have to sort out the compatibility. And the compatibility is really dependent on the other items that I'm going to talk about over the next 10 minutes. Specifically, to give you a little bit more detail, as I mentioned, there is a share services API, share services AMP that goes together with share. So obviously, share ought to be considered a Java extension. By all means, it's not a REST integration. I mean, technically it is a REST integration with Alfresco, but since it ships its own APIs, which actually ultimately hook onto the Java services, it really is a Java extension, if you know what I mean. And so we need to clarify what is the Java public API, if you want, lifecycle. And that, in turn, will define what is the compatibility of share against the platform. I'm going to cover this in the next points. Does that make sense to you as an answer for now?
For now, yeah. I definitely, I'm not totally clear on the end of what you were talking about the share stuff, which is all mostly JavaScript web scripts being part of the Java API. So it's something.
Well, not part of the. Let me rephrase this. I think it's an important point. Let me actually go forward, and as part of what I discussed, I'll touch back on this, okay? And feel free to call me out if I wasn't clear. So, as said, this is definitely the first and foremost area that we worked, again, mostly internally as a release agility, but obviously also for admin and developers to be able to consume independent parts of the platform without necessarily having to upgrade everything, and especially think about customizing some instances, being able to upgrade components independently. It's a very good, I think, improvement with respect to the current process. Together with this, as part of the release agility, we have done some other separation and clarification, specifically Alfresco Core, Alfresco JLAN. They now live in their own separate code base and artifact, and are actually released to a set version because we rarely change them. We are looking into isolating also Web Quick Start, which is now following the share release lifecycle, but those are really minor aspects for what you guys are interested in. I think the next big topic that tightly connects to the release agility and separation is the investment on our developer platform, specifically on our APIs and compatibility metrics of the APIs. And let me, before I dig into that, let me just sort of call out why these two projects are, if not just one project, are highly connected. So in a separated world, when we move out of the monolithic development and release cycle, in a separated world where there is Alfresco, there is share, there are a bunch of modules, there are a bunch of apps that work against our REST API. And when I say modules, they work against the Java API on Alfresco or the share extension points like how type of, so they're really in-process modules, as opposed to applications that leverage our REST APIs. So in a separated world, both internally and externally, it is fundamental for us to define clear contracts of interaction between the different modules, whether they interact at Java level through the Java API, or whether it's an application that works against the REST API. We need to clearly identify and support a set of contracts. I'm using the generic words contracts or extension points to not just limit ourselves to, Java interfaces or REST APIs. For example, on the shared side, the extension contracts is a widget plus a set of configurations plus a set of well-known locations where you need to add your files. So it's just more than an API. That's why I'm calling it extension points. If we don't clearly identify those and we don't put a support window around those, we'll basically get into the craziness of having to maintain a multi-dimensional compatibility matrix between every single module, every single product, every single potential application that we have out there. So the approach that I'm having on the APIs, before going and expanding and making them more feature complete, making them more cloud ready, and adding new authentications, adding all new features that we know need to get in there, the approach I'm taking is more of a two-phase consolidate and expand type of approach. The first phase, and that's the one that I'm targeting for the next release, is going to be highly geared towards identifying what our contracts of extensions are, both on the platform side, REST API, Java API, which of the different flavors of the REST API we need to use. On the shared side, what are the shared extension points that you can leverage and support, and we will support for you moving forward. And again, on the REST, Java, and sort of shared UI extensions. Identification is the first step. Support is the second step. What is the window of support that we provide and document and support for you guys, and obviously for us as well internally now that we develop as modules and as a more modular release process? What is the window of support that you can rely on to build the customization and make sure that it works without having to retest, redeploy, recode? The policy that I'm looking now, and this is still under discussion, but the policy I'm looking now is a major version support policy. Definitely for the in-process APIs, so the Java and the Share API, we want a customization built against a major version of Alfresco to work throughout the whole major version. Any minor version, any service pack, any hotfix should not change or break your APIs. We are enforcing this at test level, and we are making sure that there are updated documentation for these extension points, so that it is exactly clear what you need to leverage and what you can leverage and for how long that will be stable for you. So this is to me the key area. Back to your question, Bindu. I see the Alfresco platform has two main ways of being extended. What I call an extension, so it's an in-process module that gets added and uses the Java APIs to extend the behavior of the platform, or what I call an integration, so a standalone web app which uses only the REST API to communicate to Alfresco. You might say, on a shallow level, you might think of Share as an integration because it's actually, a web app that lives on its own and communicates via REST APIs. But the trick is, Share is not using our public API, which are the ones that we're going to put a support lifecycle around. By the very fact that Share ships its own AMP that gets installed onto the platform, and these web scripts leverage the Java API, then share becomes a Java extension, if you know what I mean. If that now makes more sense with respect to what I was saying before.
We could just say extension and not say Java.
Exactly. Call it extension rather than integration. Exactly. That's also the terminology. I wrote a glossary. It's the terminology that I'm trying to also push out in docs to sort of have a certain standard there. So to your question, then, if share, and that's something that I need to, again, enforce and verify, but if share leverages only public API on the Java side, well, then its compatibility matrix is driven by the general API compatibility matrix. So I would expect share, my requirement would be for share to be compatible throughout a whole major version of Alfresco. There might be caveats, and I'm sure that as we go with this, you know, obviously this launching this major version compatibility policy in a minor version, which is probably going to be the next, might create some confusion, and I'm sure that there's going to be some follow-up work that maybe we need to tie it up in the next major release, but I'm sharing with you guys the direction, you know, also for validation and understand what you guys think.
So along those lines, what are you guys thinking about, you know, historically what we've seen from Alfresco is, you know, Peter talked a lot about kind of the release life cycle, right? And historically what we've seen, for example, with share, and we've seen this with the repo as well, is kind of some new stuff happens and the old stuff doesn't necessarily follow along. So APIs are a great example of that, right? We have 3 or 4 different sort of sets of APIs. Can you talk a little bit generally, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you talk a little bit generally about kind of what the policy is going forward about dealing with that essentially technical debt both in share and in the API? I think from the API level, you've touched it pretty well, actually.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think a very good question, and again, we had obviously a little prep before this meeting, and I was happy to share, you know, I was happy actually to have a discussion with Bindu and say, you know, Bindu, this is what I'm going to share, you know, we want to consolidate and expand, this is our strategy on the REST API, and he was like, wait, what REST API are you talking about? And that was a really good validation for me on the idea of, okay, yes, we definitely need to consolidate first before we go and move forward. So very good question, and he wasn't prepared. So the direction there is going to be obviously. So I talked about 3 different areas. Let's drill down in each of them. The first one is the Java. Well, the first thing that you need to know is that strategically as a company mandate, and as you know, you have seen this over the last couple of years already, but you'll see moving forward, you can expect moving forward from a platform standpoint, a much stronger investment on the REST API versus the Java API. This is obviously motivated by a number of reasons, including the current technical debt in our Java platform, meaning we're going to put some tactical fixes there, and I can talk to them, but you'll see more and more that the investment, the major bulk, and then the major sort of feature completeness, the whole set of enhancements, we're going to be more and more focused on the REST API. When I mean the REST API, I mean, as you correctly say, right now, if you go in our documentation, you'll find 3 different references, duplicated APIs that do the same thing in slightly different ways, built with different technologies, unclearly defined or identified and supported. So my current approach there is to basically identify, I'm starting to call the old, so WebScript API, the one based on /API, if you want. It is actually what I'm calling the V0 of our REST API, very unstructured, sort of, you know, grow organically. Then we have the Alfresco 1 API, and that's what I'm calling the V1. specifically, what I'm looking at is strategically investing more and more in the V1 API, so making it more feature complete, more authentication method is built on a much more modern, testable, independently developable, if it's even a word, type of framework, and on clear guidelines, especially. Peter did a great job 2 years ago specifying exactly how the URIs should look like, all the parameters. He gives us internally very good guidelines, but also out there gives, first of all, a much easier self-discovery capability to your clients, but also, it serves itself, for example, to build a client. We can actually build a nice client that leverages a clear URI space for which you guys don't even have to care anymore about the REST API. You can just drop a client. Think about the chemistry client, for example, as a similar sort of thing. So yeah, directionally, more REST than Java, more the new REST API than the old web script-based one. What I'll make sure is that there is a transition plan. Even though via, I will send signals out there of the direction of the company by, for example, changing the support status of some of the APIs, or surfacing up one documentation versus removing another one. Don't worry, I have in mind very clear the fact that the new REST API is not feature complete. So I cannot just drop the old one. So there will be a transition plan there, more to come. For you to know, what you can expect is, both on REST, on Java, and on Share, clearly documented set of extension points in one nice, neat page in the documentation, with samples attached to them, and samples that actually are run into the build so that we make sure we don't break them at any single commit. And there will be a support window around these extension points. So this is definitely, my commitment for the consolidate phase. As far as the expand phase goes, we are doing a lot of validation, and I plan to engage with the community through OLE as well to make a lot of validation on what our investments should be. Again, we are very aware of the state there. We need to add more, so I think we really need to make sure we validate a lot so that we invest on the most important things first.
And maybe if I could just jump in and at a high level, just say that the overall intent with the REST strategy, and Gab, please jump in if I'm miswording this, but really the overall strategy is to get client applications that interact and integrate with Alfresco dependent on API versions, not product versions. Because right now, we know we have a backwards compatibility challenge with Java extensions, Share extensions, even to some degree CMAS client applications. And part of that is because we never viewed the API as kind of this isolating contract that can be used to decouple the server-side implementation from the client-side or extended logic implementation. So the intent, over time, it's going to take time. As you say, we've got a large amount of technical debt to pay off before we will fully be here. But certainly the intent is to get to the point where a server advertises a set of API versions, and clients that use one of those API versions will work with that server. Yeah. And that gives us evolution and the ability to continue to innovate. And it gives client applications the guarantees around backwards compatibility. That means they're not rewriting their logic on every single new version of Alfresco, which we know is, that's a treadmill that we don't want you guys to have to be on. But it's kind of, to some degree, the nature of Java and the nature of 2005 era APIs is that's just what that era of technology did. And we know it's bad. We know there are better alternatives, and we're trying to evolve towards a better future.
But actually, this is a very good segue, Peter, for me to sort of actually close the previous conversation, which is, to a certain extent, you might expect different support policies for the REST API or backward compatibility policies for the REST API and the Java/Share API. In fact, as Peter just said, it's likely that the in-process APIs, so Java on the repo side, Share on the Share extensions like how, if you want, on the shared side, will follow a compatibility policy and a support policy that is driven by the underlying product version. Because otherwise we will need to make a major investment, for example, on the Java side, as Peter was saying. Java is not built for versioned APIs. Yes, we can look at OSGI, nice frameworks like this, but again, in the spirit of investments on Java are tactical, not strategic, we're probably gonna, freeze a policy, which is a compromise. It's not ideal. We're not making this clear-cut API versus product version, but it definitely is a much. I would assume it's perceived as a major improvement with respect to what we have now, where bin IDs can change, public APIs have changed over minor versions. So, just to sort of, thank you for the comment, Peter. It was really valid for the segue. So I don't want to hijack the whole talk, honestly, but I have a couple of more things to mention, and I just want to shut up. So I'll try to do it in 2 minutes.
No, I think you should just keep on going. We have 17 more minutes before we have to wrap it up. So
how's it possible that I'm so verbose? How can you work for me and not having me bite your head off? Seriously. So you're very patient. And Danish. So what I was gonna say is, we talked about the API, and again, I'll plan. If I'm successful, there should be a clear transition plan. There should be a clear change management aspect that is taken care of by us in terms of communicating to you, updating documentation, blog posts, Tech Talk Live, whatever we need to do to make sure that that is not as a surprise. The other part that I'm really excited to talk about, and again, on the thread of there's no external internal developer platform, it is something that is going to help us both externally for developers like you, and internally for us to modularize and in the spirit of release agility. On the as part of the tactical investment on the Java platform, we are finally looking at supporting a much more developer-friendly, but also admin-friendly in terms of isolation format for modules packaging. Specifically, I am finally looking at least for simple modules, i.e. modules that do not ship any third-party dependencies, to support the jar format for both Alfresco repository and share extensions. As you know, out there, people use these already extensively. It's even in some bits of our documentation. And again, this is another aspect where, again, in the consolidate and expand idea, I need to, go there with a flashlight and shine some light on this gray area, and then we can move forward. The great thing that I think is gonna really help here is, obviously you all know the development advantages of this in terms of development tooling, hot reloading. I'm not even gonna go there, but I exhort you to keep in mind that the other main advantage here is isolation of your modules between different modules. An AMP has the very big problem of potentially overriding other AMPs and potentially overriding product features. So from an isolation with respect to other AMPs, jars definitely gives other modules, sorry, jars definitely give us a good degree of it. From the standpoint of the isolation with respect to the product, we are looking at loading modules from outside of the web app. In the spirit of immutable containers and immutable distribution, we want to minimize, if not remove at all, the need for touching the Alfresco share var physically. Meaning, that is the blessed distribution that comes from Alfresco. You should never, ever need to modify it. Now, we know that there are places where, even in our documentation, we recommend to change the web app. So this is another area where I am doing a major consolidation.
And just to add, Gab, to that on the docs, we are currently reworking all shared developer documentation in the official docs, and I hope that within a week or so we will have a completely rearranged, all the existing developer documentation will be completely rearranged in a more sensible format that will lead up to all of these extension points, and then throughout the summer and the next couple of months we will start iterating on all the new tutorials with source code on GitHub, and there's a huge investment going on in that area, and we'll continue with that work on the repo side when we get to it. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening there.
Yeah. So I think, again, the two headlines are extension points is the key term that you're going to see more and more used in our documentation. Basically, supported extension points, that's how we call it on Alfresco and Share. And supported APIs on the REST side. Again, from the module side, support for the jar, obviously we'll add it to the SDK, but we'll have to undergo through a major amount of testing internally to ensure that that works. Plus externally loading modules from the web app. Together with this, you might find that we transition, again, some parts of the code. One of the things that I'm discussing is if we're able to actually load modules from outside of the web app, we might look into, for example, deprecating the MMT and making sure that we still have it there, once again, to the point of let's build a transition plan, let's not leave people in the ditch. But we are definitely looking at, deprecating a tool that does something that we don't want people to do, i.e. shovel stuff in the web app, because at runtime that becomes a hell to support. I kind of know something about it from my year in support and 3 years in consulting. So,
and what's interesting
I'm just going to say I see a lot of cheering going on of the notion of MMT not being needed, and the prospect of having pure jar support is just awesome. And I can add from an SDK point of view, start moving stuff into source main resources, move it out. It works fine. You can do that already now. And once we have the SDK and we have the support and everything, it will start working. So we can
I'll just
start
add something on this, and I'll let you talk, Peter. Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say that one other nice reason is that there's going to be an easy migration story from one thing that is really key, and Peter is keeping me honest there as well, is a good migration story for existing amps. Meaning, ideally, you should not even have to change them or rebuild them or use the new SDK to do that. They should just work. But on the other hand, it's also a very easy migration story. If you have an amp and you want to make it a jar, it's probably going to be 3 steps and you're done. Or we can give you a script to do it. But also, if you already have a jar, like for example, and that's why in the spirit of release agility, it helps us also internally. All of our core bits of the platform are all jars. We could easily turn that into modules by adding a module property in a proper location, and then technically, not that I'm recommending that we iterate those independently, but at least we will have a much more trackable, supportable,
consistent.
How many times in support I found customers dropping random jars from different versions, say that they were running, I don't know, Solar 4.1.5 against Alfresco 4.2 or something like that. I mean, there is an advantage, not just for outside, but definitely we're going to leverage this inside as well. So sorry to jump in there, Peter. I don't know if you still have a comment.
Well, the only thing I was just going to say, which is more of an observation than anything, but of course one of the things Gab and I have realized as we've gone through this exercise is that this is exactly where the developer and system administrator personas intersect. And although a lot of you in the community act in both roles, that's not true of our customers. Usually our customers have quite distinct DevOps or IT operations staff, and they're outsourcing their development work to our partners, to community members, to internal development teams, what have you, and the two teams are completely separate. So what's fascinating to me is one of the biggest challenges that we face from a system administrator perspective is exactly what Gab just talked about, which is mutation of the blessed gold standard, gold-plated Alfresco binaries. So modifying the Alfresco war, modifying the share war, and that's that's our own fault. We defined an extension model that required that. But one of the things and part of the reason I'm cheering about MMT is getting rid of that mutation frees me up on the sysadmin side to do a lot of things that right now I can't do, because I have to assume the customer is basically running a fork. They have a customized binary that is not the one that we have, and we can't. It's very difficult for us to support customers doing that. So it's interesting how these kind of all buttress each other. I kind of think of it as a big. We're building a cathedral, and Gab's flying buttresses around the, one side of the church, supporting mine on the other side, and the net result is we're going to have a wonderful cathedral. So, mixing analogies a little bit, but it's interesting to me just to see how these things all actually end up interrelating.
And one thing that I think we didn't mention, I think you had a bit of a flyover on the upgrade task force stuff, but that's another. I wanted you to show actually that slide about our research, because I think it was really, telling of this phenomenon that you just mentioned, of how completely different worlds that on a superficial level they seem completely different, actually, they come together. So specifically, Peter has done a huge amount of research on the upgrade side, on what are the topmost impediments for our customers to actually upgrade. And you know what he came up? Well, he came up that the problem was the stability of our API, i.e., I've developed a shared customization and you break it all the time. I develop a REST extension or a Java extension, you break it all the time. That's what preventing me from upgrading, not, admin-specific stuff. It was actually a developer problem. So again, while it was discovered in a pure admin, focused research, it gave me a great deal of motivation and validation to actually go and consolidate these extension points and boundaries.
Yeah, and what Gab's referring to there, I wish I had the slide in front of me, but 2 of the top 5 upgrade issues we discovered actually aren't to do with the upgrade system. They're to do with extensions and customizations, including, no surprise, number 1. And number 1 on the upgrade research we did was share extensions. Share extensions break on upgrade. And from the customer's perspective, it's not a developer platform problem, although we all know that that's the root cause. It manifests as an upgrade problem. So one of the great things is that the upgrade task force work, which I was coordinating, actually supports some of the things that Gab had kind of put in the backlog, and all we did was we gave us a boost in terms of validated prioritization. Yeah. So yeah, that was, again, it's this wonderful buttressing thing where, we fix one thing and suddenly it opens a universe of possibility on another side.
I think I'm going to shut up for now. There is another initiative that I worked on, which is scalability and testing on a billion document repository, but I think that would require a separate Tech Talk Live. So I might give you updates on that a little bit later.
So we have 5 minutes left. So if there's any questions from the viewers, now's the time to speak up. One question that came in was on the Google Plus page. We have Lewis, who asks about the main focus or roadmap for Share, especially now that it's a separate project. There's none of us who's in charge of Share from product management on the panel, so that's probably something we'll have to get back on. But the whole idea is for Share to have its own release cycle, and we can iterate on it faster. We don't have to wait for Alfresco to come up with a new release to turn things around for Share. I expect we'll get some more updates on Share as we move along, at least from a product management point of view.
Yeah, we're definitely not the best people to comment on that.
Nope. I don't see any questions other than that. Bindu noted on the chat is just a minor thing about the jar support, and I can add from an SDK point of view, this will make making an Alfresco module or extension is going to be much easier now. Just produce a jar, having a well-placed module, the properties in there, both for the repository and for Share. It's going to be much more fun and much easier, and the SDK is going to be so much lean and simple to work with. So that's, I think that's great.
Yeah, I'm hoping also that I think lots of we've had contributions in the SDK, especially in the last 1 or 2 years. People here on the panel are, I think, the topmost contributors to the SDK, including Bindu, as well as from Alfresco engineers. But I honestly believe that a big hurdle for, more general contributions to the SDK is the whole Maven black magic that I had to introduce to support a non-standard packaging type like AMP. So I'm hoping that if we're not talking, just be clear here, huh? We're not talking about dropping support for AMPs, okay? We're talking about adding a new packaging, potentially deprecating the tool to install AMPs into the web app. I've never said, don't go repeat it, that we're going to kill AMP as a format. Not that I necessarily love it, but we still need something to ship a complex module, i.e. a module that has third-party dependencies. As simple as that. That cannot be a jar. We can decide to make it an Uber jar, we can decide to make it a zip, fine. For now, I'm leaning towards, we have something that does that. So let's just keep it for now, and we'll see later. So just wanted to kind of clarify this point.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Does that make sense, Bindu?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
Good clarification.
Otherwise, things gets relayed, the telephone game.
Yeah.
So that's it from my side.
And I don't see any more questions, and we are almost on the top of the hour. So any last notes?
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about all these initiatives. It's been, hearing back chatter and rumors and stuff, it's awesome to kind of hear it in a more official forum. And it really, I think, demonstrates how far Alfresco has come, even in the last 6 months, in the last year, in the last 6 months, in the area of really beginning to address, the implementer. So that's developer and admin, right? The implementer role, right, which I'm representing, I think, here, and also really beginning to dig into, okay, there is some technical debt. This is a product that was started in 2005, and we've been pushing that forward. And how do we kind of rein that in and build something that's going to be awesome in 10 more years? And I'm just hats off to you guys for just an amazing job, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for the kind words, Bindu. So we're on the top of the hour, so I just want to thank each of you for participating. Thank you for the questions from the audience, and I'll see you next month.